Well, welcome everybody to a very special series called the Covid-19 Wellness Series that is put together by Serve Canada in association with ARRA Arts in support of Trillium Health Partners, and the Trillium Health Partners Foundation. They have three hospitals that Trillium takes care of: the Mississauga Hospital, the Credit Valley Hospital, and the Queensway site. Regional hospital providing world-class healthcare for a healthier community right here in the GTA. My name is Jake Dheer. I am blessed to be sitting on the board of the Trillium Health Partners Foundation. And joining me is my dear friend and host, as well as the founder of ARRA Arts, an organization along with Serve Canada that are doing exceptional work. And they're the ones that are bringing this COVID-19 Wellness Series together. Today, we have a very, very special guest. I'm going to invite Anu. Anu, welcome. And please tell us a little bit about our guest. But before we do that, Anu, speak a little bit about the impetus behind COVID-19 Wellness Series.
Thank you, Jake. Foremost, I would like to bring the greetings from Premier Doug Ford for endorsing and supporting the COVID Wellness Series.
Thank you to Serve Canada, Trillium Health Partners, and ARRA Arts on the launch of the incredible initiative to highlight mental health and wellness. I know this pandemic has been tough for a lot of people, especially on their mental health. And the reality is that no one is immune to it. Everyone can sometimes experience burnout, depression, anxiety, and isolation. I hope that through this series, you can learn how to care and maintain your mental health. Your mental health is just as important as your physical health. Even though you may feel alone or helpless, I want you to know we have your back. If you need someone to talk to, please reach out to some of the amazing mental health and addiction agencies in your community. Thank you and God bless you.
Mayor Bonnie Crombie here from the great city of Mississauga, sending my best wishes to all the organizers and participants attending the COVID-19 Wellness Series hosted by Serve Canada and ARRA Arts in collaboration with Trillium Health Partners. COVID-19 pandemic has brought so many uncertainties to our lives and has disrupted our way of living. It's okay to not feel okay during these uncertain times. It's important to stay active and stay connected mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. The COVID-19 Wellness Series is an opportunity for people to de-stress and take care of their mental health and well-being. By showing up at today's session, you are making your mental health a priority, and you should be very proud of yourself. Brighter days are ahead. In the meantime, stay healthy and stay safe.
Hello, my name is Nicole Lamont. I'm the Vice President of Philanthropy for Trillium Health Partners Foundation. It is my privilege to get to thank you for everything that you have done for Trillium. For those of you who may not be as familiar with Trillium, we are the hospital system that serves close to 2 million people across our Credit Valley Hospital site, Mississauga Hospital, and the Queensway Health Centre, right into West Toronto, through to Oakville, and north up to Milton and Georgetown. We have a very large catchment area and a very full offering of programs, including mental health, the largest in our region. We are so appreciative of your support of our COVID-19 Wellness Series. Your support is ensuring that patients and families have access to the mental health care supports that they need when they need it the most. We are just so appreciative. Thank you for your support. We also understand how much time and energy and dedication goes into organizing events like this, and I want to thank Anu Srivastava and your committee for everything that you have done. Thank you on behalf of the many people who will benefit from your time and your generosity. Have a wonderful event.
Well, after the lockdown in March, and a few months later, when everyone was still trying to get a grip on COVID-19 and the pandemic, Serve Canada, which is a health and wellness not-for-profit organization, and ARRA Arts, which is a social wellness organization, they took the initiative of COVID-19 Wellness Series in support of the Trillium Health Partners. And I remember the proposal went from the foundation to Dr. Dawe, and we got the warm go ahead right away. We Serve Canada and ARRA Arts are doing 10 virtual workshops, which were organized with the medical doctors, the wellness experts, and the allied professions on one hand. And on the other hand, we also had the traditional and alternative methods like yoga and meditation, with the sole purpose of sharing COVID-19 coping strategies for mental health and wellness and for self-care. And when we talk about health and wellness, we can only think of the best, the world renowned Dr. Ian Dawe, who is the program chief and medical director of mental health at Trillium Health Partners. And he's also an associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Toronto. Dr. Dawe has got many accolades to his name, and it would be very remiss for me not to name some. Dr. Dawe was the chair of Ontario Hospital Association's Suicide Prevention Standards, a mandate from the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care, establishing best practices in all of the Ontario's 151 hospitals. Dr. Ian is very well known as a full-scaler and a top influencer as part of the healthcare movement. Dr. Dawe has been the physician lead for the Central East Local Health Integration Network. He's been the founding medical director of Toronto's Emergency Mental Health and Addictions Alliance. He's been the medical director of the Psychiatric Emergency Service at St. Mike's Hospital in Toronto. Dr. Dawe is the member of board director of the Ontario Telemedicine Network, peer support accreditation and certification in Canada, and the list continues. It is my honor and it is my privilege to welcome Dr. Dawe to this workshop. Please welcome. And I'm going to jump into the first question right away. Dr. Ian Dawe, we hear a lot about the multiple waves of COVID-19 pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that really means?
Well, Anu, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you. I have to say, just before I answer the question, you read that bio just as my mother had written it, and I'm sure she appreciates that wherever she is today. The various waves of the pandemic have caused a lot of confusion, particularly now that we're actually seeing the case numbers increase, and people are wondering what is really the accurate way of describing this. From a healthcare perspective, the way we tend to think about this is that wave one really speaks to the increased morbidity and the mortality that are associated with the virus itself. We saw that very significantly in March, April, through May and June. And then things had started to subside, and now we're seeing an uptake in those cases again. Waves 2 and wave 3 actually dealt with the resource restrictions on non-COVID conditions. As we pivoted the hospital's resources and our community's resources to really manage the specifics of people who were sick with COVID, often postponing non-urgent care and transforming a lot of the in-person care to more virtual-based services. But for me, as a psychiatrist, it's wave 4 that causes me the most concern. And wave 4 is where we see the psychic trauma, mental ill health, post-traumatic stress disorder, economic injury, burnout, the stresses that are in our community. And that's where we are really concentrating at Trillium in the mental health program to support people moving forward. how do we manage the serious impact of job loss, of food and financial insecurity that COVID has brought to so many of us.
Dr. Dawe, you have outlined it so nicely. And honestly, I always thought that there were just two waves. I never thought of COVID as the repercussion of and the trigger points of from 1, 2, 3, and 4, and how far and beyond the reach of this is going, and how like we really need to look at it very closely and take care of it. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that brings to my second question, that what have we learned about the mental health impacts of the disasters and the epidemics, or even the pandemics, in a general way, to the people? Like, I mean, what does it all entail? What does it really mean?
Well, none of us have lived through a global pandemic like this one before, but we have some experience to count on in past disasters, in past epidemics, perhaps of a lower level of intensity. And what we know from that is that the mental health impact of those experiences can be seen right across the lifespan. Issues like boredom and isolation from friends and peers that were experienced by our children in the initial times of the lockdowns, the very real financial worry, the job losses that were caused by the economic contraction, the fears of getting sick that all of us faced, not to mention the real loss of loved ones. There was the moral injury and the trauma that was experienced by a lot of the frontline healthcare workers who, for a time, were facing sickness and death at a level that we hadn't experienced in our careers. So taken together, all of that can trigger a lot of mental distress, a lot of anxiety. In our populations, we see rising levels of hopelessness or helplessness. And taken to an extreme, that's when we start to worry about drug use, alcohol abuse, the compounding on pre-existing mental illnesses, and of course, the worst outcome of all from a mental health standpoint, suicide. The impacts on mental health may only show up months after a disaster has passed. And this is truly an unprecedented stress in our lifetimes. I think it tests us as a society how we choose to respond to it.
And we are so thankful, and we are like so privileged to have people and doctors like you who can guide us, who can help us, who can ride us out through these difficult times. And we cannot thank you enough for all the wonderful work you and your team have been doing for us. Jake, I'll let you take the next question.
I will. And for those of us who are just joining us, we are speaking with the amazing Dr. Ian Dawe. He's the program chief and the medical director of mental health at Trillium Health Partners, as well as the associate professor at University of Toronto. A very busy man, and a man who knows a lot about mental health. Dr. Dawe, again, it's so glad, we're so thankful that you're joining us. You talked about the impacts. I want to ask you, is there really is the impact the same for everybody? I mean, does this pandemic have a different effect on women? Does it have a different effect on children?
Absolutely. Gender inequality has been at the center stage of an inequality debate in this country for a long time. But it seems in particular that the unemployment caused by COVID-19 really focused disproportionately on job losses in the retail sectors, in the service sectors, and consequently, heavy job losses and financial strain for women, who are the ones that were traditionally employed in those sectors. Even working women, by and large, carried the really significant stress of trying to balance working from home while providing ongoing responsibility for their children's education when online learning was happening exclusively over those last several months. And I don't think we have really acknowledged or appreciated just how tough that was for so many. The other interesting factor is age has also been traditionally one of the most important factors to focus on in terms of income security. We'll talk about the impacts on kids in a few minutes, but I'm also interested in people over the age of 65, for example. They have, generally speaking, a low income rate higher than any other age group in Canada. And that makes them especially vulnerable to the pandemic's effects on financial and housing and food security, as well as obviously and unfortunately for those who were living in long-term care and retirement home, to the deadly spread of the virus itself. So differential effects on different parts of the population, absolutely.
Yeah. And we've so far only been talking, and we as in pretty well the world has only been really talking about wave one and the second wave. When you talk about wave 3 and wave 4, and you talk about the folks that are impacted, the seniors, the women, the children, right, that is going to be of real concern, because that's post effect of all of it. How are children and adolescents dealing with this? Let's speak a little bit about children and their youth or young people.
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that the pandemic has had its toll on everyone, regardless of age. But in particular, for our children who are just growing up and who are struggling to manage, if they aren't telling us directly that they're experiencing anxiety or they're experiencing stress, it does not mean that they're not feeling uneasy. Recent events have had substantial impacts on them, and they could be experiencing a host of different emotions: anxiety, disappointment, fear, anger. So it's important for us, I think, as parents, as neighbors, as family members, to listen to their concerns, even if their emotions or their expressions are extreme. It's about expressing understanding and empathy, letting them know we understand where they're coming from and appreciating their perspective. That's going to open up a dialogue to help us engage in problem solving with them. It's not a matter of just blindly reassuring them, because we don't want to be unrealistic about what we're saying. Like, there's a big difference in saying, don't worry, everything's going to be fine, versus saying, it's all right to worry, but everybody is doing their best to put practices in place to keep you safe. That latter way really speaks to validating the person's fears as realistic and assuring them that we're all in this together. Because no one knows what the future is going to look like right now. If we're struggling with our anxiety, if we're struggling with the challenges of that uncertainty, I think it's really important to try to make a plan and take baby steps towards accomplishing that plan, but then celebrating and finding joy in those accomplishments, however small they are, as a way of building confidence and security for the next step.
Very well said. Very well said. Anu, I know you have a couple of questions as well for Dr. Dawe.
No. Yeah, I was just thinking what Dr. Dawe was saying, and there's so much of truth in the fact that the universality of this situation, that everybody is in the same boat. That is somewhat of a great reassurance for all of us. And we have to keep reminding ourselves that, we are in this together, we'll come out of this together. So that definitely helps. The other thing I was thinking of, Dr. Dawe, was that now that we are into almost mid-fall. The schools and the sessions and everything have started, and there have been a lot of challenges for the teachers, the educators who are out there. They not only do they have to manage their own anxieties and their personal issues, but they also have to manage and make sure that all their families and their students, they are taken care of. Uh, I mean, it's very, very difficult for the educators. So I'm thinking, what sort of advice would you be able to offer to them?
Well, being an educator is one of the most valued jobs that we have in our society, because exactly as you're saying, they are charged with the responsibilities of managing so much. So whether you're in that parent role or whether you're in an educator role, I think one of the things we want to do is to help encourage a tolerance of fear and anxiety, not an avoidance of that. Fear naturally encourages in us as a human being a desire to run away, but avoidance really only serves to maintain anxiety in the long run. It's facing situations that promotes resiliency and actually reduces our anxieties by helping people realize that in fact they are capable of coping in uncertain situations. And that's good coping behavior that we'll want to model for our children, for our students, and for each other. So being calm, being honest, and caring is about being that positive role model through this period of uncertainty. How we handle our own fears, how we handle our own stresses is going to impact on how other people assess their situations and how they react. If you feel comfortable letting people know about your own experiences with anxiety or uncertainty, as well as the coping strategies that worked for you, by all means, sharing those statements can help people feel less alone and can provide the students and our kids with a guide of how to handle those situations themselves. As you say, these are challenging discussions for everyone, but helping others develop the being comfortable with being uncomfortable skill set is really about building in them that ability to cope with future stress.
No, you're so right, Dr. Dawe, and the coping mechanism that you have to build within yourself. And for each one, it might be a different way of doing it, for sure. I know that you have been a very, very strong advocate of self-care. And would you just explain to us what does that really mean? And how is it kind of somewhat related to mental health care? And how can we take care of ourselves in simple terms?
For sure, and knowing that the COVID Wellness Series that you are both working with was speaking to that broader notion of wellness was one of the things that really intrigued me and motivated me to put up my hand and be a part of. Because in contrast to how people think about psychiatrists traditionally, I've never been one to say that, you know, the biology of a person is the most important thing. Far from it. A more balanced and a more modern way of working with somebody is about thinking about what's happened to them, not necessarily just what's kind of biologically wrong with them. So we're not a medication type of scenario. And from a mental health treatment resource, it's really about nurturing and encouraging and improving their ability to self-care as much as it's about what we're traditionally thought of as psychological or biological folks. What I mean by that is, for me, self-care is really a way of living in which we prioritize our own well-being to live a healthier life. On a deeper level, It's about how we manage these three interdependent components: physical, mental, and emotional. Now, mental self-care involves activities that help declutter our mind and reduce our stress levels. While the key to emotional self-care involves getting in touch with our emotions to manage and attain that emotional stability and that well-being. By scheduling time each day to care for our mental health and our emotional health, we can reduce our stress and we will thus improve our overall happiness. Actively working on being healthy means things like maintaining a consistent sleep schedule, limiting the amount of caffeine or alcohol or marijuana that we might be consuming or using, making sure that we're participating in some physical activity every day. It's also about genuinely engaging with other people. We might still be physically separated, but we have to prioritize connecting with people in a appropriately distanced manner, of course. But we use the phone, we use virtual tools, we use our social media platforms, whatever approach is required to help us maintain that sense of belonging. And I think finally, self-care for me is about being open to trying a variety of calming techniques. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to finding the right resource for a person. It might be about relaxation techniques. It might be about yoga. It might be about meditation or mindfulness. Maybe it's about all of those things together. So we want to be open to and encouraging and supporting for people to check out a variety of those different practices and see what works for them to calm their mind and body. To get started, you only need a few minutes a day, and it is an incredibly valuable start.
No, you're so right, Dr. Dawe. And I'd just like to say at this time that that's not knowing that this is the way to go, but we in our family, we instituted a family video chat every day at 9 o'clock for an hour. And that was our way of, this is with our siblings. So rightly said that, it can be different things for different families, and whatever it takes, we have to take care of ourselves. And so that brings to my next question is that why is self-care so very lot more important at this time than any other time that we might have had in our lives?
Well, as you might get a sense from what I was saying a few minutes ago, I think self-care is incredibly important at all times. But it's especially important when we are stressed because it can form the basis of how we tend to manage that stress. It's something that we can and should be doing for ourselves all the time. The challenge, though, is that as human beings, sometimes we are our own worst enemy. We put off, these techniques when we feel well, and we want to turn back to them during only times of distress. But that presents itself to be a problem. Turning to a brand new coping strategy, one we're unfamiliar with and haven't necessarily practiced before, under a time of great distress, can be a real challenge because we have to learn something, we have to practice something, we have to get good at something before it really starts to pay benefits for us. I often tell people, when I'm having these conversations in a clinical setting, you have to imagine it's like learning a foreign language. And if I asked you to be able to speak a foreign language perfectly by next week, you're going to tell me that's impossible. And indeed, it would be impossible to learn something brand new and use it at full effectiveness in such a short time. We got to start, we got to practice, we got to, really kind of read and understand and learn before we're ever feeling comfortable enough to utter one word, let alone order a coffee in a different country in that different language. Self-care techniques are a lot like that. And the big example that we have is how we manage our thoughts. When there's a high level of anxiety, when there's a high level of stress going on, just like in society right now, that distress is often fueled by the way that we're thinking. If you're having thoughts such as, I'm going to get sick and I'm going to die, there's nothing I can do, I'm not going to be able to cope, those are thoughts which are going to make you understandably feel even more distressed. Those fuel our anxieties. So it becomes really, really important to recognize and realize that not all of our thoughts are in fact. They're just thoughts. They might be just worries. They might be old and outdated beliefs that they hold. Just because we think something doesn't make it true, no matter how familiar it might be to us. So understanding that becomes really the key to start controlling it and moderating those thoughts to something less distressing.
I was going to ask you, Dr. Dawe, you talked about managing your anxieties about the present and the future. And when the future is so uncertain right now, as you said, we have no idea what's going to happen. There's so much uncertainty. What are some of them? You spoke a little bit about, maybe you could delve a little bit more on how we can manage our anxieties about the present and the future during these unprecedented, uncertain times.
Of course. And I think a lot of people would recognize the term that we use to explain that, the fight or flight response. It's a natural body's reaction, evolved over thousands and thousands of years, to a perceived future threat. And it's very common. It's normal, in fact. In the days or hours leading up to an important event, most of us would recognize the experience of being a bundle of nerves. And that's our fight or flight system in action. It's entirely appropriate when faced with an acute stress, something that's right around the corner. But in these types of situations, when the stress and the threat is prolonged, when there doesn't seem to be an end in sight, when it goes on for months, that's when that stress level can actually become a real problem, and it can take its toll on our physical and mental health. We're always looking around and anxiously anticipating the worst outcome. We're staying on the lookout. We're constantly scanning our bodies for sensations that might signal some other danger. And thus, again, we're stressed all the time, short-tempered, irritable, tired, all the things that can lead us to starting to engage in maladaptive coping behaviors like alcohol and substance abuse. Those rates are up. So we want to go back to encouraging people to challenge their negative thoughts. Once you recognize you're having those negative thoughts, don't accept them. Don't accept the worry and the distress that might accompany them as being inevitable. We have to focus on adapting to new situations without losing sight of the values and the principles that make us who we actually are as people. Rumination, that constant presence of negative thoughts that we seem stuck in, that's really common during times of uncertainty. So if our minds get stuck in these negative thought patterns, if we're struggling to use our self-care to refocus on what we're doing, that's when professional therapists or coaches can be available to teach us those new skills, to help us learn more advanced ones, which kind of increase the size of our psychological toolkit to be able to handle those situations in the future. Just be ready to not react to having a thought, even if it's a negative one. Make a commitment to just notice the thoughts rather than trying to respond to them all the time. Again, they're not facts. They're just thoughts. That's a lot easier then when we can increase our focus on self-care and choosing to be kind to ourselves and to other people, to those around us. So I think the best advice is to take time to mindfully slow down, to breathe, to intentionally choose to relax. We remind ourselves of past situations in which we've coped well with uncertainty or with distress, and pick out from those memories what it was that we did that actually made us feel better back then. And then we use those learnings now. Take one step at a time. Focus on each day, being in the present moment, recognizing the healthy routines that we're speaking about here work, but they also provide us structure and nutrition and nurturing by which to fuel our bodies and our minds to cope tomorrow too. So giving ourselves that healthy physical base to operate from. That's what our advice is, and that's what we think, to Anu's point earlier, will help us get through this all together as a healthy and as a resilient society.
So, what wonderful insight, what wonderful knowledge, and what wonderful advice. I like the psychological toolkit adding to it in this, because as you said, we've never experienced a pandemic in our life, and we need to add new tools to our psychological toolkit. We need to give ourselves time to relax. And as you said, which is so wonderfully said, where, thoughts are just thoughts, they're not fact. And we need to just pause. And some great, absolutely wonderful stuff. We've been speaking with Dr. Ian Dawe, who's the program chief and medical director of the mental health at Trillium Health Partners, as well as the associate professor at University of Toronto. It's such a great honor to have you join us today, Sarah, during the COVID-19 Wellness Series, which is put together by Serve Canada in association with ARRA Arts and in support of Trillium Health Partners and the foundation, and our mental health unit. And for those of you who are watching, I would encourage you to please provide as much support as you can. Take some of this great advice that Dr. Daw has given us, and you know, during these unprecedented times, I mean, on a regular day, we need to make sure we're physically and mentally strong. I think during these unprecedented times, we need to be even more so. And some great advice from Dr. Doc. If you would like to donate to Trillium Health Partners Foundation through the mental health unit, you can just at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the link. Please do go there and donate generously. I'm going to ask Anu to come up and say goodbye and say special to some of our very special people, including the folks at Y Media. Anu?
Well, first, I have to say that what an insightful conversation we've had with Dr. Daw, and what a privilege it has been. I mean, people, you have to realize how fortunate you are to be able to listen to Dr. Daw and get all the insightful information, the conversations, the advice, which is so required during these difficult times. Thank you so much, Dr. Daw, for that. And I'd like to thank Jake Dheer, who has been in the board of the Trillium Health Partners, and he's the moderator of the series, and he's very active in the community. And I would like to thank our technical partners, Y Media, and Yudvi Jaswal, Reed Jaswal, and the whole team. Thank you so much.